This video is designed to familiarize you with rootsTrust's date wizard. Most dates we encounter in our genealogical research are simple dates composed of a month, day, and year, or partial dates that have only a month and year, or perhaps just the year. We also use less simple date expressions by prefixing sample or simple dates with date modifiers like about, before, after, and so forth. The rootsTrust event detail form, let me load it, is pretty forgiving in regards to date entry. You can enter an abbreviated date in any of a number of formats and it will parse it and convert it to your default date format. That is, the date format specified on the User Interface tab of the Preferences form. Let me show you what I mean. Options, Preferences, User Interface. Here's the date format. I'm using the default, which is the long American style date, but you have a choice of a number of different date formats that you can use. So let's go back into the event detail form, and I'll try to enter a date here in various shorthand forms. That's certainly not the format, the long American format that I normally use, but it can handle that. It recognizes what I'm trying to type in. Or I could have typed in 2 Feb 1600. And you see it accepted that as well. And there are a number of other formats I could try with slashes and dots and so forth, and they would be accepted as well. So most of the time you don't need the date wizard. However, I can think of 3 situations in which you might want to use it. 1, you keep getting an error message indicating that you have entered an invalid date and you don't know why. Or 2, you're not sure of the syntax of a particular date expression that you'd like to use, or you can't remember which date modifiers are available. Or 3, you have to deal with an exotic date. What do I mean by exotic date? Sometimes when working with older records or records from other countries, we run into date expressions that are strange to us or even totally unintelligible. For example, Quaker dates, French Republican dates, British regnal dates, Christian movable feast dates, and dates in foreign calendars such as Hebrew, Indian, Islamic, or Persian. Such dates most likely have to be converted to their Gregorian or Julian equivalents to be meaningful to us. If you watched the tools video, you learned that rootsTrust has a separate tool to convert each of the date types I just mentioned. The date wizard combines the functionality of all these tools into one app to help you deal with exotic dates. Let's take a look at the wizard. If you invoke it by clicking the date label button, remember label buttons are always underlined, on the event detail form. If the date field is populated with a valid date expression when you open the date wizard, it will be displayed on the form in all aspects. That is, the calendar type combo box will be adjusted to reflect the calendar type used originally to define the date, and the date type combo box will show the date type originally used. In addition, the display value, the database value, and the internal sort date are displayed. The database value is what you see in the date field of the event detail form. The database value is what is stored in the database, and the sort value, also stored in the database, is a numeric value in the format YYYY MMDD for year, month, date. It's used to sort events chronologically in the event summary on the person view. This being the event summary on the person view. If the date field of the event detail form is empty when you invoke the wizard, the form defaults to simple date type and the Gregorian calendar. Now if you select the vague date type, a combo box appears from which you can select a date modifier. Most of them are self-explanatory, with perhaps the exception of calculated, the modifier of choice when entering a date that you have calculated from other data, such as a birth date extrapolated from the death date and age at death taken from a death certificate. Notice that if we select between, the fields necessary to provide a second date become visible. Similarly, if we select or, we also see the fields for a second date. And notice that the modifier combo box is now located between the two sets of date fields. If we change the date type to period, we also have enough fields to enter two dates when the from modifier is selected. From can be used without the second date, in which case it is identical in meaning to the since modifier. Similarly, the first date of the from to sequence can be left blank, making it equivalent to until. Which style you choose is up to you. Some people are confused by between and they confuse it with from to. If you are uncertain which to use, mouse over the modifier combo box and read the tooltip text. This event occurred over a period of time starting on the first date and ending on the second date. So we're talking period events refer to an event or fact that is in effect over a period of time. Now if we go back to the vague type and click on between, look at the tooltip text there. The event occurred sometime between the first date and the second date. So that's the difference. The next date type in the combo box is interpreted. This allows you to equate a date with a text string called a date phrase. The date phrase then appears in parentheses following the date. For example, you would like the date field of an event to contain the text, the Battle of Bunker Hill. So you enter June 17th, 1775 there, and then Battle of Bunker Hill. And there you see the display value where we have the date, the modifier interpreted, the actual date of the event, and the name of the event in parentheses. The final date type in the combo box is phrase date, which is similar to the interpreted date, except that there is no date. There's just the date phrase. Actually, this is not a date, and rootsTrust unwillingly supports it because it is part of the GEDCOM specification. If you choose to use this date type, or non-date type, if you will, rootsTrust allows you to supply a pseudo year so that the program, knows where to place the event in the event summary. For example, you know that John Smith died late in life. So you generate a phrase date for his death. If the event has no numeric date component, the default sort date becomes 0, which causes the death event to display at the top or near the top of the event summary above the birth event. But setting the pseudo year to 9999, you ensure that the event is displayed at the end of the list. So let's do that. Close this down, and we'll create a death event for our friend John Smith. Go into the wizard, select phrase, late in life, close it. Okay, and you see the death event is displayed above the baptism event, next to the birth event. The birth event is at the top because it doesn't have a date assigned to it. So let's go back in and add the pseudo year. And now it appears at the end of the event summary where it belongs. Now let's look at some of the other calendar types. Although the label next to the combo box says calendar, not all of the entries are actual calendars. 3 of them identify non-standard ways of expressing Julian or Gregorian dates rather than being separate calendar types. The 3 in question are British Regnal at the top, Movable Feast, and Quaker at the bottom. So let's go through the entire list here, starting at the top with British Regnal. Here dates are expressed relative to the coronation of a British monarch. So if I'm going to enter a British Regnal date. 1 was the day of the month. January 63 is the year relative to the coronation of the monarch in question, Elizabeth II, the sitting monarch. And we see here in the sort date that it's January the 1st, 2014. So dates like this were very common in the 17th and 18th century, particularly in British legal documents like probate documents. Okay, the next entry in the calendar combo box is French Republican, for dealing with dates from France and its possessions from 1792 to 1806. This is a totally different calendar than the Julian or Gregorian. I will enter a French Republican date, 16 Frimaire, year 14. And it turns out to be December the 7th, 1805. Sometimes these dates are hybridized using the French Republican day and month designation, but with a Gregorian year. So for that reason, the entries in the year combo box have the year, the span of dates, of Gregorian dates that correspond to the French Republican year. The date I just typed in, I found in a German baptismal register with the Gregorian year. So it said 16 Frimaire 1805. If you attempt to convert a hybrid French Republican date, you must be very careful that you select the correct year, since the French Republican year always starts in late September, as you can see from the list here, the total list. They all start either on 22nd, 23rd, or 24th of September, and thus they span 2 Gregorian years. So next in the combo box we have Gregorian, the default, which I have already covered in earlier examples. And then comes Hebrew. Gregorian, Hebrew, Indian Civil, Islamic, Julian, and Persian Jalali all function pretty much the same way. The only difference being the names of the months and perhaps the order of month, day, and year. I'll quickly demo a few for you. Hebrew. Okay, I'm going to enter Hebrew date, 29th of Tevet, year 5774, and over here we see in the sort date, it's January the 1st, 2014. So now if I switch calendars to the Indian civil calendar and enter the date 11 Pausha 1935, again we get January the 1st, 2014. By the way, this Indian civil calendar is the calendar that's currently used in India. The Islamic Hijri calendar, the next one, I'll enter a date 28 Safar 1435, and we recognize the sort date over here again, January the 1st, 2014. Now we change to the Persian Jalali calendar and enter the date 11 day 1392, and again we have in the sort date January the 1st, 2014. Let's go back and look at the Julian date pane. All dates prior to January the 1st, 1582 are Julian, since the Gregorian calendar had not yet been introduced. Similarly, all dates in British and British colonial documents prior to January the 1st, 1752 are Julian. You do not need to identify such dates as Julian. The only time that I can think of where you would want to explicitly enter a Julian date is when a document has a date in it that is identified as a Julian date, or that you know is Julian, and is being used in an era and location where the Gregorian calendar was the standard. Here's a hypothetical example. You have found a record of a 1755 baptism in an American colonial church for one of your ancestors. You know for a fact that the church did not convert to the Gregorian calendar until 1760. So the baptism date from the church record will be 11 days earlier than the civilian calendar date in effect at that time. If you decide to enter the original date from the church record into your database, you should then identify it as being a Julian date. Let's enter the Julian date of December 31st, 1581. This was the last day of the Julian calendar, official last day in the Vatican. Now, the next day, which was January the 1st, 1582, was the first year of the Gregorian year. Now notice that the display date has an OS following the date. This is the standard abbreviation for Old Style, which is used to indicate that a date is a Julian date and it's being used in a Gregorian environment. Okay, let's now go to the movable feast combo box selection. Movable feasts are Sundays in the Christian church calendar that do not occur on the same date every year. Easter is one. Dates of events in church records that are relative to movable feasts are typically given in Latin, even though the records were written in the national language. In order to accurately convert these date expressions to conventional dates, you must know whether the church that created the record was operating under the Julian or Gregorian calendar at the time of the event. Let me bring up an event. Here is a movable feast date. This is the full Latin expression. Domenica is the Latin word for Sunday, and this means this is of course, the 21st Sunday after the Feast of Trinity in 1762. This is the way it actually appeared. The abbreviated form is the way it appeared in the church record. The final entry in the calendar type combo box is Quaker, which, as I mentioned before, is a non-standard method of expressing a Julian or Gregorian date. At first glance, Quaker dates don't look problematic. They start with a day number, and then the month number, and finally the year. An inexperienced person would probably assume that the second day of the second month of 1740 would be February 2nd, 1740. And that person would certainly be surprised to find out that it actually works out to be April 2nd, 1740. This experienced person would probably be even more surprised to learn that the first day of the 11th month of 1740 was actually January the 1st, 1741 by present day reckoning, since before 1752 in the British Empire the year began on March 24th. Thus, the day after March 24th, 1740 was March 25th, 1741. Strange. Very strange. This is not rocket science, but it can be very, very confusing, even for experienced genealogists. So it can be a very helpful tool. After the 1752 adoption of the Gregorian calendar in the British Empire, the month number in some Quaker records was relative to January, while in others, March remained the first month. The problem is that you can't tell which month was number one by looking at the document. Thus, Quaker dates later than the first day of the 10th month, 1751, that do not identify the month by name are ambiguous, and as such should probably be entered into your database in their original form without being converted to their Gregorian equivalents. I'd like to show you an example. Here's an event date that I entered in the original Quaker format because I didn't know what date it corresponded to. Here in the notes I have ambiguous Quaker date, could mean December 4th, 1787 or February 4th, 1788. All of the examples that I have shown up to now are only good if you want to enter the original date of an event as it appears in the supporting document into your database. Now I'm going to show you how to generate a date expression that has both the original date and the Gregorian or Julian equivalent. The interesting thing about these expressions is that they are GEDCOM compliant, thus allowing you to include dates in your database that could otherwise not be expressed in GEDCOM language. The vehicle for this is the interpreted date type. If I first select interpreted and then British Regnal as calendar type, I get this. Then I enter the date 15 November year 7, monarch James I. And then here it generates from my display value, that gives me the actual, in this case it's a Julian date, and in parentheses the date, the actual British regnal date as it appeared in the document. If I click on OK and then I see it there, well, then what if I say, well, the actual date in the document was abbreviated. So if I click on it again, I can go in and edit that phrase so that it appears exactly the way it did in the document. I can do the same thing with other types. I can go in, let's go do a movable feast. So if I select uh, 21 Trinitatis 1762, and I have to decide whether to use Julian or Gregorian here, but I know that by 1762 in Sweden, let's assume that this is from a Swedish record, by 1762 they had completely converted over to the Julian calendar throughout the country, so I can assume that that's the correct calendar. So here it generates a display value which gives me the equivalent Gregorian date plus the original feast date here in as a sort of a comment in the date phrase. But actually in the record I know that it was abbreviated, so I wanted to look just like it did in the record, and there was a period after the 21 and then there was a that was abbreviated, and Trinitatis was abbreviated as well. So now I have a replica of the way the actual date appeared in the document. So this works for all the data types that are available. So this concludes the date wizard video. If you haven't already done so, watch the tools video, which discusses the individual date conversion tools.